Does mankind possess a soul? There are some who say that mankind does not possess a spiritual component to his existence that will continue to exist after his earthly death. But upon examination of the Scriptures, we learn of the fact that man is a dual-natured being. There is a physical element to man's existence, and there is a spiritual element to man's existence. Let's investigate that during the course of this study. First, let's go to Genesis chapter 1. To try to answer this question, let's look at verses 26 and 27. It says, "Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." The Scriptures do not just teach that mankind has been created by God with a physical existence. Instead, the Scriptures teach that God also gave mankind a spiritual element to his existence. Mankind has been created in the image of God. Consider John chapter 4 and verse 24 and a statement Jesus makes about God's nature. He says, "God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." God is spirit. He's not a physical being with a physical body, although Jesus did exist for a short time in human form. Therefore, whenever God in the Genesis record says that man has been made in the image of God, this cannot refer to a physical resemblance. Instead, it must refer to the fact that mankind has been created with a spiritual element to his existence. In fact, as we'll continue to see, the Scriptures plainly demonstrate the truth that mankind has been created with a spiritual element, a soul, that will survive physical death and will continue to exist beyond this physical life on earth. However, before moving on to some other passages that further demonstrate this fact, look back at Genesis chapter 1 and the record of creation and observe that only mankind has been created with this spiritual element to his existence. You simply never read about God creating any of the other physical things like the plants and the animals with a spiritual element to their existence. It was only mankind who was created in the image of God and was given dominion over all the other physical things on this earth. Next, I want us to go to Luke chapter 20 and verses 37 and 38. It says, "But even Moses showed in the burning bush passage that the dead are raised, when he called the Lord, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. For he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him." In this text, Jesus points to the burning bush passage in Exodus 3 to answer the question identified in Luke 20, verses 27 to 33. The Sadducees, who were a sect of the Jews who denied the resurrection and the existence of the Spirit, as you can also see over in Acts 23 and verse 8, they asked Jesus a question concerning the resurrection, and their question involved a complicated scenario concerning a series of 7 brothers, each taking the same woman as wife after a brother would die and bear no children. And then they ask, in the resurrection, whose wife does she become? For all 7 had her as wife. And Jesus begins to answer their question by responding that the marriage is a physical relationship that only exists here on this earth. After the resurrection, there will be no more marriage nor giving in marriage, nor is there any more death. Then Jesus makes reference in verses 37 and 38 that we've just read to the burning bush passage to prove that the dead are raised. He said that there is evidence that the dead are raised in the statement that the Lord made to Moses when he identified himself as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, Jesus said God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Therefore, whenever God claims to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and this is years after these individuals had experienced physical death, this is proof that these individuals still continue to exist. Another passage is over in Luke chapter 16 in verses 22 and 23. It says, So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. This passage finds itself in the context of Jesus' teaching concerning two individuals, a rich man and a very poor beggar named Lazarus. Jesus' teaching begins by describing how these two individuals live very different physical lives. One man had all the things he desired to have, while the other man was full of sores and desired to be fed with the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. However, Jesus' statement in verses 22 and 23 concerning these two individuals indicate that both men experienced physical death. And then please notice that both of these individuals continued to exist after the point of their physical deaths. The beggar, named Lazarus, was carried by angels to Abraham's bosom, and the rich man found himself in torments in Hades. The text then goes on to record a conversation between the rich man and Abraham detailing the torment the rich man was experiencing after his physical death. Therefore, this passage demonstrates the basic fact that there is something we will experience after death, that our souls do in fact survive physical death. The physical element was only part of their existence. And now go to Luke chapter 23, and in verse 43. And Jesus said to him, "Assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." This passage comes in the context of Jesus' crucifixion. At the time of his crucifixion, Jesus was crucified between two thieves, and during this time, one of the two thieves demonstrated a penitent heart. Rebuking the other thief who was blaspheming Jesus, he said, "Do you not fear God, seeing that you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we have received the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong," in verses 40 and 41. And then this man continued and said to Jesus in verse 42, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Then, in verse 43, Jesus told this man that he would be with him in paradise that day. Now, from a physical perspective, all three of these men would die, as they were all hanging on their crosses, experiencing physical deaths. However, Jesus' statement indicates that both the thief and Jesus would continue to exist beyond their physical deaths. There was more to their existence than just the physical existence. For Jesus and this penitent thief, their physical deaths marked the point at which they would go to paradise. A final passage I want us to consider is over in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 in verses 1 through 8. It says, "For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation which is from heaven, if indeed, having been clothed, we shall not be found naked. For we who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not because we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, that mortality may be swallowed up by life. Now he who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who also has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. So we are always confident, knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord, for we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, yes, well pleased rather, to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Now, just prior to making these statements, Paul wrote concerning his great hope in that which is unseen and eternal, if you go back to chapter 4 and verses 16 through 18. And in that passage, he speaks of both the outward man and the inward man. The outward man was perishing due to the affliction he was experiencing and the natural aging process. However, his inward man was being renewed day by day as he was looking for the eternal things God had promised to reveal. And in this context, Paul makes some further observations to the Corinthians concerning his outward man and his inward man, as we read in 2 Corinthians 5, verses 1 through 8. Paul plainly identifies a time when his physical existence, his earthly house, would be destroyed. He even references this physical existence as a tent, and you might note that a tent is only a temporary structure. However, Paul does not begrudge the thought of this time when his physical existence would end. He does not say that physical death would be the end. Instead, he said that he groaned while in this tent, looking for the time he could be further clothed with the heavenly body God has promised, as you could also go and see in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 through 58. Again, Paul is eagerly anticipating this time when he could be absent from the body and be present with the Lord. Clearly, Paul was looking forward to this time, a continued spiritual existence after his physical death. Certainly, each one of these passages help us to understand that the physical element to our existence is not all that God has created us to have. Instead, these passages all demonstrate that mankind continues to exist somewhere after our lives on this earth come to an end. But what should these important truths mean for us today? First, they have implications for how we live our physical lives. We should know that this earthly life is not all there is. We should know that we will all continue to exist somewhere after our earthly lives end. This then should cause us to evaluate whether there is any connection between the way in which we live our lives and where our souls will continue to exist. And if so, we should desire to live in the way that will result in the best possible outcome. Therefore, the truths we've just established have the potential to completely transform the ways in which we choose to live our earthly lives. And second, they have implications for what happens to us after we die. The truths that we've been establishing also have great implications for us as we seek the answer to the question, what happens after death? We can know that we will not cease to exist at the point of physical death, and therefore we can search for the truth about what God says will happen to us after we die. Mankind does possess a soul. This soul does survive physical death. Not only do you need to recognize that you do possess a soul, but you need to recognize that your soul is your greatest possession, even greater than your earthly existence, as you can see in Matthew 16 and verse 26. In fact, Jesus simply said over in Matthew 10, verse 28, "And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell."